Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the heart of Lagos, Chinedu has it all: a successful career, a beautiful wife, and children who are supposed to be the joy of his life. But beneath the surface, he's trapped in a cycle of exhaustion, pressure, and unfulfilled dreams. His wife, Ngozi, obsessed with luxury and status, drags him further into a world of materialism, while Chinedu longs for something deeper: freedom, peace, and love. One day, a mysterious woman introduces Chinedu to an ancient ritual that promises to change his life forever. But as he dives deeper into this dangerous path, he soon realizes that tampering with the forces of the past has dark consequences. Strange occurrences plague his life, and soon, he's torn between the powerful forces around him and the life he's been trying to escape. As Ngozi becomes more desperate to control him and their marriage crumbles, Chinedu discovers a new sense of self, drawing closer to a woman who offers him the love, laughter, and freedom he's been searching for. But will the shadows of his past consume him, or will he rise above the darkness to reclaim his future? Watch the thrilling journey of Chinedu's transformation, filled with dark magic, unexpected twists, and shocking revelations. Subscribe, like, share, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with every new episode. Chinedu had it all, or so it seemed. In the heart of Lagos, Nigeria's city of dreams, he was a respected doctor with a comfortable home and a beautiful family. To outsiders, his life was perfect. He was living the dream many people worked their whole lives to achieve: a good career, a beautiful wife, Ngozi, and 2 kids who brought laughter and joy to his home. But on the inside, Chinedu was slowly unraveling. The burden of his life weighed heavily on him. Every day felt like a repeat of the last. He was exhausted, not from the physical work, but from the constant pressure to be everything everyone expected him to be. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father, the perfect doctor, yet he felt like a puppet on strings, with no control over his own life. Ngozi was no help. She had turned into a walking display of status symbols. She'd show off the latest designer handbag, boast about their expensive holidays, and invite friends over just to flaunt their lifestyle. But what was the point of all the luxury if he couldn't find any peace at home? Chinedu had once hoped they'd build a life together, but now, all they did was drift further apart. His days were a blur of work, meetings, and meaningless conversations. When he came home, Ngozi would be on her phone, organizing another lavish event, while he sat in silence, pretending everything was fine. But deep down, he felt trapped in a life that he no longer wanted. One night, after a particularly draining day, Chinedu decided to walk alone through the streets of Lagos. The city was alive, the noise of traffic and voices swirling around him. He felt a mix of dread and exhaustion. That's when he saw her. An old woman, standing by the edge of the road, selling herbs and charms that he had heard about in whispers. "You look lost, doctor," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. Chinedu stopped, staring at her. How did she know? The old woman's eyes sparkled with a strange knowledge, as though she could see the burden he carried, the emptiness he tried to hide. She smiled, holding out a small charm made of bones and twine. "This will give you back control," she said simply. "Everything you feel, the suffocation, the weight, you can escape it. But the price is more than you think." Chinedu hesitated, torn between skepticism and desperation. He was willing to do anything to find a way out. Chinedu took the charm, slipping it into his pocket as he walked home. For the first time in months, he felt a small flicker of hope. The weight that had been pressing down on his chest seemed a little lighter, though the city around him still felt heavy. When he arrived home, Ngozi was on the phone, laughing with one of her friends. She barely glanced at him as he walked through the door. There was a coldness between them that seemed to grow with each passing day. She had her life, her friends, her status. She didn't need him. Chinedu sat down at the dinner table, his mind racing. He needed something more. Something to shake this feeling that he was stuck in a cycle of pretending. The old woman's words echoed in his mind. Everything you feel, the suffocation, the weight, you can escape it. He didn't sleep that night. His mind was too active, swirling with dark thoughts. Was the charm really the answer? What could he lose by trying it? The following day, he decided to follow the old woman's instructions. She had told him that to truly free himself, he needed to perform a ritual. It wasn't something he had ever believed in, but now, it felt like his only option. The ritual would take place at midnight, under the cover of darkness. The charm had to be placed under his bed, and he was to recite words from an ancient book he'd found hidden in his office. It was strange, unsettling, yet strangely alluring. As midnight struck, Chinedu sat in his dark bedroom, clutching the charm. He began to chant the words softly, not fully understanding them, but trusting the process. He felt a cold chill fill the room, but instead of fear, he felt a surge of something powerful and ancient. Suddenly, the air around him shifted. The room felt charged with energy, vibrating with a force he couldn't comprehend. A whispering voice, distant yet clear, filled his ears. "You want to be free? Then you must pay the price." Chinedu froze, his heart racing. What had he done? And was this really the answer? The next morning, everything was different. When Chinedu woke, it felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He was no longer overwhelmed by the constant pressure to please others. He felt a lighter. The heavy fog that had clouded his mind was gone. For the first time in months, he could breathe easily. It was as if a door had opened, and he had walked through it, into a space of freedom he had never known before. But as the day went on, the world around him seemed to shift. Things became more strange. He noticed small details that he hadn't before, like the way Ngozi's laugh seemed hollow, or how the sound of the city's bustle felt distant, like it was coming from another world. He could hear the thoughts of the people around him, fleeting whispers in his mind. It wasn't just his senses that were heightened. His body felt different too. He had more energy, more clarity. But it wasn't long before he realized that this new freedom came with consequences. As the day wore on, the strange occurrences grew. Objects would move on their own, and shadows seemed to flicker and twist at the corners of his vision. He could hear the sound of footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Ngozi, too, was becoming more distant. She seemed to be caught up in her own world, obsessed with maintaining their luxurious lifestyle. She hadn't noticed the changes in him, nor did she care. All she wanted was the next big event, the next opportunity to show off their wealth. Chinedu felt as though he were living in a nightmare, trapped between the freedom he had gained and the darkness that was slowly consuming him. The old woman's words echoed in his mind, "Everything comes with a price." Chinedu knew he had made a dangerous deal, but the question was, could he reverse it before it was too late? Chinedu couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in his chest since the ritual. Something was not right. At first, it was the little things, disembodied whispers that drifted through the walls, or the strange coldness that followed him everywhere. But it was when he began to notice the eyes, those watching, unseen, lurking in the shadows, that he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Ngozi, for her part, remained oblivious. She was caught up in planning yet another extravagant party, obsessing over what to wear, what designer to flaunt, what Instagram picture would make them look even more perfect. To her, life was a showcase, a performance, and Chinedu was merely a prop in her play. He watched her, wondering how she could be so lost in her own world when he was starting to unravel. One morning, Chinedu went to the office, hoping the familiarity of his work would offer some reprieve. But it was there, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the hospital, that things started to spiral. A patient, a young woman, looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed his arm as he walked past. "Doctor," she whispered, "it's you. You're the one they're after." Chinedu recoiled, confused. "What do you mean?" But the woman's eyes began to gloss over, as if she had spoken words she didn't mean to. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault. It's them." Then she fell unconscious, her body limp, and doctors rushed in to take her away. The whole encounter was like a bad dream. Chinedu stood frozen, heart pounding. What had she meant? "They're after you?" He rushed to the nearest bathroom, staring into the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, but it was wrong. Something was off. His skin looked paler, his eyes darker. He touched his face, and for a split second, his own reflection smiled, a twisted, mocking grin that vanished the next second. He felt it. The darkness. It was growing inside him. That night, Chinedu was unable to sleep. The whispers had grown louder, calling his name, echoing in his head. When he closed his eyes, he saw them, shadowy figures moving just out of his sight. They weren't human, not exactly. They had an otherworldly presence, watching, waiting. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on his door. He jumped, heart racing. It was 3 a.m. The city was silent. No one ever came knocking at this hour. He opened the door cautiously. Standing there was a man he didn't recognize, wearing a tattered suit, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. His voice was soft but sharp, like a blade cutting through the air. "Chinedu," the man said, "you've made a deal with forces you don't understand. You need to stop." Chinedu's breath caught. "Who are you?" The man stepped into the doorway, his eyes glinting with a dark intensity. "I know what you've done. I was there the night you made the choice. You think you're in control, but you're not. They want you to stay trapped forever." Chinedu's heart raced, the fear gripping him like a vice. "What are you talking about? What's happening to me?" The man's eyes darkened. "You summoned something you can't contain. And now, it's hunting you." Before Chinedu could respond, the man vanished, as if swallowed by the shadows. Chinedu stood there, speechless, heart pounding in his chest. The next day, everything seemed wrong. The sun was too bright, the city too loud. Chinedu couldn't focus on his work, every moment was consumed by the thought of the man at his door. What had he meant? Ngozi was still in her bubble, preparing for another party, her phone glued to her hand. She had no idea what was happening to Chinedu, she only cared about how their life looked from the outside. It was like they were living in two different worlds. That night, Chinedu couldn't take it anymore. He had to find the answers, and he knew where to look. The old woman, the one who had given him the charm, she held the key. She had to know what was going on. He found her the next evening, sitting at the same street corner, the air around her thick with the smell of herbs and incense. She was waiting for him. "You've come for answers," she said, her voice not a question, but a statement. She wasn't surprised. "Tell me what's happening to me," Chinedu demanded. "Why is this happening?" The old woman's eyes gleamed with an eerie light. "You thought you were seeking freedom, but what you summoned wasn't freedom at all. It was a curse. Now they are hunting you, those who live in the spaces between the worlds. They've been watching you since the moment you took the charm. Chinedu's stomach twisted. How do I stop it? She shook her head. You can't stop what you've started. But you can bargain. You must offer something you value more than anything. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He felt sick. What could he possibly offer? His life? His family? Suddenly, a chilling thought struck him. Was Ngozi part of this? Could she be connected to the dark forces he had unleashed? That night, Chinedu couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, feeling the darkness around him. He began to wonder if this curse was connected to more than just him. Could Ngozi have brought this upon him? Had she sought help from the same powers in her quest for more wealth and status? He decided to confront her, but when he looked at her in bed, asleep beside him, he noticed something unsettling. Her face looked strange. The features were distorted, twisted in a way he couldn't explain. Her skin was pale, and her breathing was shallow. He reached out, shaking her. Ngozi, wake up. But she didn't stir. He shook her harder, fear creeping into his chest. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open, but they were no longer her eyes. They were black, dark, endless pits of emptiness. Chinedu recoiled, stumbling backwards. What are you? Ngozi's voice came out in a low, guttural whisper, almost as if it wasn't hers. You thought you could escape. But now you will pay the price. Before he could react, the room began to spin, the shadows crawling up the walls like they were alive. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble. Chinedu tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. In the corner of the room, the shadowy figures he had seen before began to emerge, their faces twisted in horror. They were coming for him. Then, everything went black. Chinedu awoke in a cold sweat, gasping for air. The room was still. The shadows were gone. Ngozi lay beside him, peacefully asleep, as though nothing had happened. But now, Chinedu knew the truth. His wife was connected to the forces that were hunting him. She had always been obsessed with power, with status, with control. And now, he was paying the price for it. But there was something worse, something even more terrifying. Chinedu had become a part of this curse, whether he liked it or not. The darkness was inside him, changing him. The following day, Chinedu felt the weight of the curse closing in. He tried to act normal around Ngozi, but there was something in her eyes, something different. It wasn't the same woman he had married. She was no longer the picture of elegance and grace. Now, her presence felt cold, as though she carried a hidden agenda. When he tried to speak to her about what had happened the night before, Ngozi brushed it off, laughing it away as a nightmare. You're overworked, Chinedu. You need to rest. We can't have you going crazy now, can we? But Chinedu saw the glint in her eyes. She was hiding something, and he knew it. Later that evening, he received an unexpected visitor, a woman dressed in flowing white robes, with eyes that held the deep, unnerving wisdom of someone who had seen beyond the veil of this world. She appeared in the doorway, uninvited, and without warning. I've been waiting for you, Chinedu, she said in a voice that was soft but had an eerie resonance. You've made a choice, and now the world you once knew will never be the same. Chinedu's heart raced. Who are you? She stepped forward, her presence making the air heavy. I am the Oracle. You have summoned forces beyond your understanding. And now, you must face the consequences. Chinedu tried to back away, but he couldn't move. His legs felt like they were glued to the floor. The Oracle continued, her voice now taking on a darker tone. You've made a deal, but the cost is far greater than you realize. It was never meant to be just for you. The darkness is now in your family. Chinedu's mind spun. What did she mean? The darkness. His family? You mean Ngozi? He whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. The oracle's eyes were like black holes, swallowing all hope. Yes. The curse is not only upon you. It's upon her too. She is bound to the forces you sought to control. Her obsession with power, her desire for status, it has opened a doorway to something far more sinister. The world seemed to close in around Chinedu as panic rose within him. How do I stop this? The oracle gave him a cold smile. You can't. Not now. Not alone. But there is one way. You must destroy what you value most. But beware, for the cost may be more than you can bear. Before he could respond, the oracle disappeared, leaving Chinedu alone in the silence of his home, his heart racing, his mind spinning. What did she mean? What was the price he would have to pay? The following days felt like a nightmare Chinedu couldn't wake from. The whispers grew louder, filling his head at all hours. No matter how hard he tried to focus on work, to focus on his family, the dark presence lurking in the corners of his mind kept growing stronger. Every time he looked at Ngozi, he saw something different in her eyes, something called calculating. And worse, there was a strange energy between them, like an invisible thread that had been severed but was still pulling them together. It was during a dinner with Ngozi's friends that Chinedu first noticed how deep the darkness had penetrated into their lives. Her friends were no longer the women he remembered, full of laughter and light. Instead, their conversations were laced with veiled threats, whispers of power, and something darker. One of her friends, a woman named Ada, leaned in close, her voice low and conspiratorial. Ngozi, she said, are you sure you want to keep playing this game? The forces you're dabbling with are far more dangerous than you realize. Ngozi smiled, but it wasn't her usual charming, carefree smile. It was something sharper, something more predatory. Oh, Ada, she said, her voice smooth like silk, don't worry about me. I know exactly what I'm doing. Chinedu's stomach churned. Ada's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he truly feared for his wife. He didn't know if the darkness inside her was something that could ever be stopped. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the image of the oracle's words. You must destroy what you value most. The next morning, Chinedu went to work, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about what the oracle had said. He had to destroy something. But what? Was it his career? His wealth? Or was it something even closer, something that would break him? At the hospital, he was distracted, his focus shattered. He couldn't help but feel the darkness swirling around him, like a storm just waiting to consume him. As he walked down the hall, the lights flickered overhead, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. That was when he saw it, the same woman, the one from the hospital, the one who had whispered to him days before. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her pale face illuminated by the flickering lights. She stared at him, her eyes wide with terror. The darkness is spreading, Chinedu, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the hospital. It's coming for you. Before he could respond, the woman collapsed to the ground, her body convulsing violently. Chinedu rushed over, but when he touched her, she froze, her body stiff and lifeless. He stumbled back, panic surging through him. No. No, 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 he muttered to himself, his mind racing. The darkness was real. It was here. And it was coming for him. Chinedu ran home, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to figure out what to do. He had to find a way to end this madness before it consumed him and everyone he loved. That night, as Chinedu sat in his study, surrounded by books and medical papers, the door to his office slammed open. Ngozi entered, her face pale and drawn. I know what you're doing, she whispered, her voice shaking. You're trying to leave me, aren't you? Chinedu stood up quickly, confused. What are you talking about? Ngozi's eyes were dark, unnaturally dark, as though they had been swallowed by the same void that was consuming Chinedu. You think you can escape me, Chinedu? You think you can just run away from this? He took a step back, feeling the weight of the curse around him. Ngozi, what's happening to you? She smiled, but it was not her usual smile. It was twisted, warped. What's happening to me is what's happening to you. We are in this together, whether you like it or not. She moved toward him, her steps slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Chinedu felt the darkness swirling around her, growing stronger. You can't escape this, she whispered, as the room grew colder. In that moment, Chinedu realized something. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for his soul. Chinedu barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw shadows moving in the corners of his room. He heard whispers that sent chills down his spine. The darkness was real, and it wasn't just inside him, it was inside Ngozi too. The curse had taken root in their lives, spreading like a poison. And now, it seemed, it wanted to consume everything they loved. The next morning, Chinedu decided to confront Ngozi. He couldn't stand the tension any longer. As he approached her, he saw that same strange darkness in her eyes, those black, almost soulless orbs. The woman he had once married was slipping away, consumed by forces beyond their understanding. Ngozi, he said softly, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. We need to talk. This thing, this curse, it's affecting both of us. We need to stop. Ngozi's lips curved into a smile, but it wasn't the smile of the woman he married. Stop. Chinedu, why would I want to stop? The power, the freedom it promises. You must understand. We were meant for this. I've been chosen. Chinedu's heart sank. She was beyond reasoning now. The curse had twisted her mind, and he feared it might be too late to save her. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was a delivery. A small, unmarked box was waiting outside. Chinedu picked it up with trembling hands. Inside, there was an ancient-looking charm, a piece of carved wood with strange symbols etched into it. What is this? He whispered, turning to Ngozi. She didn't answer. Instead, she just smiled, her eyes darkening further. It's time, she said. Time for the final step. The charm pulsed in Chinedu's hand. It felt warm, almost alive. He couldn't explain it, but he knew it was tied to the curse that had overtaken their lives. His heart pounded in his chest as Ngozi's words echoed in his mind. It's time for the final step. But what was the final step? What would it cost? Chinedu glanced at the charm again. He remembered the oracle's warning, destroy what you value most. But what was it that he truly valued? His family? His career? His dignity? The pressure weighed on him. He knew that the only way to break the curse was to make a sacrifice. But as the darkness closed in around him, the very idea of sacrificing something dear filled him with dread. Was it worth the price? Ngozi, now completely consumed by the curse, stepped closer, her movements eerily deliberate. Do it, Chinedu. You know what has to happen. We have the power now. Nothing will stop us. But Chinedu was not so sure anymore. He had seen too much. The shadow that loomed over their lives was darker than he had ever imagined, and the cost of wielding it was greater than he could bear. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. A familiar face stepped into the room, an old friend, one of Chinedu's closest confidants, Obina. But there was something wrong with him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. Chinedu, he gasped, you have to listen to me. It's not too late. You can still stop this before it's too late. Chinedu's heart raced as he saw the desperation in Obina's eyes. Obina, what are you talking about? The curse is already here. It's taking over everything. Obina stepped forward, his voice trembling. No, it's worse than you think. Ngozi is not just possessed by the curse. She's the one who called it. She's the one who set this all in motion. And now, she's dragging you deeper into it. Chinedu's world seemed to collapse around him. How could this be? How could Ngozi, the woman he had loved, the woman who once shared his dreams, have been the one to summon this darkness? The walls of Chinedu's house felt like they were closing in. The darkness that had taken over their lives was now a tangible force, spreading its tendrils into every corner of their home. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The curse was consuming everything. Obina's revelation had shaken him to his core. Ngozi wasn't just a victim. She had been the one who had started this. She had been the one who had summoned the forces that were now tearing apart their lives. How could you, Ngozi? Chinedu asked, his voice cracking with emotion. How could you do this? Ngozi didn't respond. Instead, she stood there, her eyes wide and empty, as though she was lost in a trance. The charm that had been delivered to their house that morning pulsed in the air like a dark beacon calling to the forces beyond. Obina stepped forward, his face grim. It's not too late to stop this. But you have to act fast, Chinedu. You have to destroy the charm before it can complete the ritual. Once it's done, nothing will stop the darkness from swallowing both of you. Chinedu felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. He had to act quickly. The charm, the ritual, the curse, it was all connected. And now, he had to make a choice, destroy what he valued most, or lose everything. Chinedu, Obina said urgently. You must make your choice. You have to break the chain before it pulls you under completely. If you don't, you'll lose your soul, your life, everything you hold dear. Chinedu turned to Ngozi, his heart breaking as he realized that the woman he had once loved was now his greatest enemy. The curse had twisted her beyond recognition. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He knew what he had to do. He had to destroy the charm. But in doing so, he might lose Ngozi forever. Chinedu held the charm tightly in his hands. The darkness surrounding him seemed to grow heavier, suffocating him as he prepared to do what he knew he had to. His heart was racing, his mind torn between love and the cold reality of the curse. Ngozi stood before him, her eyes empty and lost, her once beautiful face now twisted with shadows. The darkness in her was stronger than ever before, but he knew that if he didn't destroy the charm, she would be completely consumed. I love you, Chinedu whispered, his voice breaking. But I can't let this happen. With a final, trembling breath, he lifted the charm and smashed it against the ground. The moment it shattered, a deafening scream filled the air. The room seemed to shake, the walls cracking as though they were about to collapse. The darkness that had been consuming them both screamed in fury, trying to hold on to its grip. But it was too late. The curse had been broken. Or so he thought. In the aftermath, as the dust settled, Chinedu looked around. The house was still. Too still. He turned to Ngozi, hoping to find her back to the woman she once was. But what he saw sent shivers down his spine. Ngozi was gone. In her place, standing in the doorway, was something much darker, something far more sinister than the curse they had just fought. Will Chinedu and Ngozi's relationship survive? Or is it the end? Join our next episode to find out.